The laughter echoed through the halls of Graceland like the sweetest melody Elvis Presley had ever heard. Not the roar of a sold-out arena, not the thunder of thousands chanting his name, not even the standing ovations that had followed him across America. This sound was different. It belonged to a little girl running barefoot across polished wooden floors, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Elvis watched her with a smile that no camera had ever captured. Millions of people believed they knew the king of rock and roll. They knew the dazzling jumpsuits. They knew the flashing lights. They knew the records that shattered history. But none of them knew the man standing in that quiet room. Because behind the famous gates of Graceland, there was no king. There was only a father. He crouched beside the grand piano and tapped a playful rhythm on the keys. His daughter giggled. "No, Daddy, you're cheating." "I'm not cheating," Elvis laughed. "I'm improvising." She crossed her tiny arms with exaggerated seriousness. "That's what cheaters always say." Elvis burst into laughter. For a moment, time itself seemed willing to stop. Outside, reporters waited beyond the gates. Inside, the world had disappeared. His daughter climbed onto the piano bench, her little legs swinging freely above the floor. "Play the happy song." "The happy song?" "The one you always make up." Elvis smiled. "I never play it the same way twice." "That's okay." "Why?" "Because every time you play it, it feels like today." Those words settled quietly inside his heart. Children never realized how deeply they could change a grown man's soul. He placed his fingers on the piano. A gentle melody floated through the room. Nothing complicated, nothing meant for records, nothing destined for history. Just music created by a father for the only audience that truly mattered. She leaned against his shoulder while humming random notes that didn't match the melody at all. Elvis didn't correct her. To him, she sounded perfect. The afternoon sunlight slipped through the enormous windows, painting golden patterns across the polished floor. Dust drifted lazily through warm beams of light. The entire house felt alive. Even the old grandfather clock seemed to tick more softly. Elvis looked around the room. Every trophy, every gold record, every framed magazine cover, every photograph with presidents, actors, and world leaders. None of them mattered anymore, because all he wanted was this moment. One ordinary afternoon. One little laugh. One memory. He quietly wondered whether success had fooled him for too many years. People believed fame made life bigger. But standing there, he realized love made life deeper. His daughter suddenly jumped off the piano bench. "Catch me!" She ran. Elvis chased after her through the hallway. She laughed louder. He intentionally slowed down. "Oh no, she's too fast. I'm winning." "You always win." "I know." She hid behind one of the enormous marble columns inside Graceland. Elvis pretended not to see her. He scratched his chin dramatically. "I think she disappeared forever." A tiny giggle escaped from behind the column. "Oh?" He looked toward the ceiling. "Maybe aliens took her." Another giggle. "Or maybe—" Silence. He slowly stepped closer. She became invisible. Suddenly she leaped out. "Boo!" Elvis acted as though he had nearly fainted. "Oh, you scared me." She laughed so hard that tears formed in her eyes. For several beautiful seconds, nothing else existed. No tours, no concerts, no contracts, no interviews, no cameras. Just a father and his little girl. Then, everything changed. The laughter stopped. Not gradually, not naturally. It simply stopped. She froze. Her smile faded. Elvis noticed it immediately. Parents always did. He knelt beside her. "What is it, sweetheart?" She didn't answer. Instead, she wrapped both tiny arms around his neck. She held him tighter than she ever had before. Elvis felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of performing, not the fear of failure, not the fear of critics. This was different. This was the fear every loving parent eventually discovers. The fear that something invisible has entered your child's heart. She looked into his eyes. Those bright little eyes suddenly carried a question far too heavy for someone so young. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Daddy?" He smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Will you still be here?" She hesitated. "When I'm all grown up?" The question struck harder than any headline, harder than any criticism, harder than any disappointment he had ever known. For a heartbeat, Elvis couldn't breathe. His smile disappeared. The room became unbearably quiet. The grandfather clock continued ticking, but somehow even time seemed afraid to interrupt the silence. Thousands of performances had taught Elvis how to stand confidently before enormous crowds. Yet now, one little girl had asked a question he could not answer. He searched desperately for words. Words had always been his greatest gift. Tonight, they abandoned him. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Why would you ask me something like that?" She looked down at the floor. "I heard people talking." His heart tightened. "What people?" "They said famous people are always gone." She swallowed. "They said you belong to everyone." Another pause. Then came the sentence that quietly shattered him. "But..." Her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I just want you to belong a little bit to me." Elvis felt tears threaten the corners of his eyes. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. Not managers, not reporters, not fans, not friends. Only his daughter. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for presents. She wasn't asking for another toy. She was asking for time. Something even the richest man in the world could never buy back once it was gone. Elvis wrapped his arms around her. He held her so tightly that it almost felt as though he wanted to stop the future itself. Outside, the world still celebrated the king. Inside, a father was silently breaking apart. He looked toward the towering windows. Beyond them waited another tour, another series of sold-out arenas, another season of applause, another mountain of expectations. Everyone wanted something from Elvis Presley. The music industry wanted more records. Promoters wanted more concerts. Television wanted more appearances. Fans wanted more performances. History wanted another legend. But standing in his arms, one little girl wanted only one thing: her father. And for the first time in many years, Elvis wondered whether the greatest performance of his life would happen under bright stage lights or inside the quiet walls of his own home. He kissed the top of her head, without anyone else hearing. He made a promise, not to the world, not to his career, not to history, only to the little girl whose heartbeat he could feel against his chest. Whatever happened next, he would never again allow success to steal moments that love could never replace. He did not yet know that the promise he made that afternoon would soon force him to choose between the life the world expected him to live and the life his daughter needed him to protect. And that choice would change everything. The next morning, Graceland woke before the sun. A thin blanket of mist floated across the endless lawn, while the first rays of daylight slowly touched the white columns of the mansion. Everything looked peaceful. But Elvis Presley had not slept. He remained seated beside the grand piano where his daughter had asked him the question that refused to leave his heart. "Will you still be here when I'm all grown up?" The words echoed louder than any stadium crowd he had ever faced. He had spent years believing that applause was the loudest sound in the world. He had been wrong. The quiet voice of a child carried infinitely farther. He rested his hands on the piano keys, but could not bring himself to play. Every melody reminded him of her smile. Every silence reminded him of her fear. As the clock struck 8, the peace inside Graceland disappeared. The telephone rang. Once, twice, then again. His manager's voice came through the receiver with unmistakable excitement. "Elvis, this tour is going to be the biggest one yet. Every ticket is nearly gone. Television stations are asking for exclusive interviews. Promoters are doubling the offers. This is history." History. That word suddenly sounded strangely empty. Elvis looked through the window toward the garden. His daughter was outside, carefully arranging tiny wildflowers into a crooked little bouquet. She was smiling. She had no idea that adults were already deciding how many more weeks her father would spend away from home. His manager continued speaking. "If we accept these new dates, we'll be traveling for months." Months. The word landed like a stone. Months meant missed birthdays, missed bedtime stories, missed breakfasts, missed afternoons at the piano, missed memories that could never be recreated. Because concerts could always be scheduled again. Childhood never could. "Elvis?" His manager waited. "This opportunity won't come twice." Elvis closed his eyes. No, neither would his daughter's childhood. "I need time to think." There was silence on the other end. "You've never asked for time before." "I am now." He gently placed the receiver back onto its cradle. For the first time in years, he had chosen silence over success. Only a few minutes later, another black luxury car rolled through the gates of Graceland. Executives, producers, advisors. Each carried contracts worth fortunes. Each wore confident smiles. Each believed they already knew his answer. Inside the library, papers covered the enormous oak table. One executive pointed proudly toward the schedule. "Every city is sold out." Another added, "This tour will become legendary." A third smiled. "The world needs Elvis Presley." The room waited. Everyone expected the king to nod. Instead, Elvis quietly asked a single question. "What if my daughter needs her father more than the world needs Elvis Presley?" The smiles disappeared. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one producer laughed softly. You can spend time with family after the tour. Elvis looked directly into his eyes. Can a child pause her childhood until her father comes back? Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. No one dared respond. The meeting ended without a single contract being signed. News traveled astonishingly fast. Within hours, rumors spread across the music industry. Some claimed Elvis was exhausted. Others whispered he was losing his passion. Several newspapers speculated that retirement might be approaching. None of them knew the truth. The greatest battle of his life was not taking place beneath bright stage lights. It was taking place inside his own heart. That evening, Graceland became peaceful once again. His daughter sat beside him on the back porch, watching hundreds of fireflies dance across the warm Tennessee air. She rested her head against his shoulder.
Daddy?
Yes?
Are those little stars?
They're fireflies.
They look like tiny dreams.
Elvis smiled. I think you're right. She watched them for a long time before asking another question.
Did you always want to be famous?
He thought carefully. When I was young, he paused. I only wanted people to feel something when they heard me sing.
And now?
He looked at her. Now I only hope the people I love never doubt that I love them. She reached for his hand. Her fingers were still so small that they barely wrapped around one of his.
You know,
she whispered.
I don't care if everyone knows your name.
He turned toward her. I already know the best part.
And what's that?
She smiled with complete innocence.
I get to call you Daddy.
Those simple words shattered every remaining wall around his heart. At that very moment, another telephone inside the house began ringing. Then another. Staff members hurried through the hallway. A secretary stepped onto the porch, her face tense.
Mr. Presley?
She hesitated.
It's urgent.
He slowly stood. There are reporters outside the gates. She swallowed nervously.
They've heard you may cancel the tour.
He looked toward the front entrance. Camera flashes were already visible beyond the trees. The entire world was waiting for an answer. Behind him, his daughter gently tugged at his sleeve.
Will you still read me a story tonight?
The question was so ordinary, so innocent. Yet it carried more weight than every contract stacked inside the mansion. Elvis looked toward the gates, then back at his daughter. One side of Graceland was calling for the king. The other was calling for a father. He realized he could not stand in both worlds forever. Soon, he would have to choose. And whatever decision he made, someone's heart would be broken. As darkness settled over Graceland, Elvis stood alone in the hallway, staring at two doors. One led outside, where thousands of cameras waited for the legend. The other led upstairs, where a little girl waited for her bedtime story. He remained motionless. The silence stretched endlessly. Then, without saying a single word, he took his first step. But no one saw which door he chose. That answer would change not only his own life, but the lives of millions who believed they already knew the man called the King. Morning arrived beneath a sky painted in soft shades of gold. Outside the gates of Graceland, the world had already gathered. Television trucks lined the road. Photographers stood shoulder to shoulder. Fans clutched records, photographs, and homemade signs, hoping for just one glimpse of the man they called the King. Rumors had spread overnight. Some believed Elvis Presley was about to announce the biggest tour of his career. Others whispered that he was preparing to retire. No one knew the truth. Inside the mansion, everything was quiet. There were no rehearsals, no musicians tuning guitars, no stage lights. Only the gentle sound of a little girl turning the pages of a picture book while sitting on the living room floor. Elvis watched her from across the room. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply watch. Not because he feared losing the moment, but because he finally understood how precious it already was. His daughter looked up and smiled.
"You're still here." 3 simple words. Yet they carried more meaning than every award displayed throughout the mansion. Elvis smiled back. "I told you I would read you a story." She patted the empty space beside her. "Then come sit with me." He walked across the room and sat on the carpet beside her. There were no expensive chairs, no famous guests, no audience. Only a father and his little girl, sharing an ordinary morning that felt more valuable than anything money could ever buy. She handed him the book. "I want you to do all the voices." He laughed. "All of them. Even the funny ones." He cleared his throat dramatically and began reading. Every character had a different voice. Every page made her laugh harder. Soon she was laughing so much that she leaned against his shoulder. That sound. The sound that had filled Graceland only a day before returned once again. But this time, Elvis did not take it for granted. He closed the book for a moment. "What are you thinking about?" She answered without hesitation. "I'm thinking this is my favorite day." His heart nearly stopped. Not because of fear, because of gratitude. Outside, reporters continued waiting. Inside, time itself seemed to slow down. A member of the household quietly entered the room. "Mr. Presley," he spoke almost in a whisper. "They're still waiting outside." Elvis nodded. "I know." "They're asking if you'll make a statement." He looked at his daughter. "Give me just a few more minutes." The man respectfully stepped away. Those few minutes became the most important minutes of Elvis's life. He took a sheet of paper from a nearby desk. He stared at the blank page for a long time before writing. Not lyrics, not a speech, just a few honest lines. When he finished, he folded the paper and placed it inside his jacket. Then he stood. His daughter looked up. "Do you have to go?" He knelt beside her. For a little while. She wrapped her arms around him.
"When you come back,"
she whispered.
"can we finish the story?"
Elvis kissed her forehead. "I promise." She smiled.
"I believe you."
Those words gave him more strength than a stadium filled with applause ever had. He walked toward the front doors of Graceland. Each step felt heavier than the last. As the doors opened, a wave of flashing cameras lit up the morning. Questions came from every direction. "Mr. Presley, are the rumors true? Are you canceling the tour? What happens next?" Elvis stepped to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. Millions would later remember that silence. Not because it was loud, but because everyone seemed to feel that something important was about to happen. He unfolded the piece of paper. Then, after a long pause, he looked away from it. He no longer needed the words he had written. He spoke from his heart. "My entire life, I've been blessed beyond anything I ever imagined." He looked across the crowd. "You gave me your applause." His voice softened. "You gave me your love." Another pause. And because of you, I've lived dreams that a little boy could never have imagined." He smiled. But yesterday, he stopped for a moment, collecting himself. "Someone reminded me that the greatest stage I'll ever stand on isn't built with lights. It's built inside a home." The reporters remained perfectly still. "My daughter asked me a question." He did not repeat it. He didn't need to. "That question made me realize something I should have understood a long time ago." He took a slow breath. "There will always be another concert. There will always be another song. There will always be another opportunity. But there will never be another chance to live today exactly as it is." His eyes wandered back toward the mansion. "So, today," he smiled, "I'm choosing the role that matters most. I'm choosing to be a father." No one spoke. Many lowered their cameras. Some reporters quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Fans who had arrived expecting exciting news found themselves applauding for an entirely different reason. Not because they had gained another concert, but because they had witnessed something rarer. A legend choosing love over applause. Elvis thanked everyone for their understanding and stepped away from the microphone. He did not wait for more questions. He did not pose for photographs. He simply turned around and walked back through the doors of Graceland. As the doors closed behind him, the noise of the outside world disappeared. He climbed the staircase. At the end of the hallway, one small bedroom door stood slightly open. A tiny voice called from inside. "Daddy?" He smiled before answering. "I'm here." She looked up from the picture book. "You came back." "I told you I would." She held out the book with a grin. "We still have the last chapter." Elvis sat beside her once again. He opened the book. Before reading the first line, he looked at his daughter. She wasn't watching the pages. She was watching him, as if she wanted to make sure he was truly there. He smiled. "So," he said softly, "where did we leave off?" She rested her head against his shoulder. "Right where every happy story should be." Outside, the world would always remember Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll. Inside Graceland, however, no gold record, no sold-out arena, no standing ovation could ever compete with the title spoken by one little voice before she closed her eyes that evening. "Good night, Daddy." And in that quiet room, far away from the lights, the applause, and the endless expectations of the world, Elvis finally understood that history might remember the legend, but love would always remember the father.